This video is made possible by Olafly, unlimited data for your next trip in seconds. More on that in a moment. If it sets its mind to it, the country we're focusing on today could go a long way to changing the course of the war in Ukraine. I'm talking about South Korea. So far, South Korea is one of the few major military powers aligned with the West that has not sent offensive weaponry to Ukraine. After more than 2.5 years of war, Seoul has not taken that step. And it hasn't done so for one simple reason: North Korea. In the land of K-pop, they are afraid that sending armaments to Ukraine would automatically set off a direct action by Russia in the internal affairs of the Korean peninsula. An action in favor of North Korea, naturally. We're talking, for example, about the delivery of missile technology, avionics, or similar. Of course, this is not a fear that comes out of the blue. In fact, Putin himself has already directly threatened to do so on several occasions.
If South Korea supplies weapons to Ukraine, it will not like the answer. I hope they won't do it. It would be a big mistake.
In recent months, after Russia began buying a huge amount of weapons and ammunition from Pyongyang, Seoul began testing the waters. It began to say that they were considering contributing to militarily equipping the Ukrainian armed forces, which is exactly what we can see in news items like this.
South Korea to consider supplying arms to Ukraine after Putin-Kim pact.
Russia's response, as you have seen, has been clear and direct. For Moscow, it's an intolerable red line that would have serious consequences. Now, exactly what threat would Seoul face if it decided to send weapons to Ukraine? Well, here's just one clue.
Putin says Russia may send North Korea high-precision arms.
Moscow is blackmailing Seoul to its face with the threat of providing Pyongyang with Russia's most advanced precision weaponry if they even think about meddling in the war. Of course, despite being made in Russia, with all the limitations that this implies, we're talking about technologies far superior to those currently available to the North Korean regime. This would logically reduce the technological advantage of the South Korean armed forces, which is currently light years ahead of its neighbor. But why is Russia threatening Seoul in this hostile way? Are they so worried that South Korea might start supplying weapons? Aren't there enough other countries sending weapons to Ukraine to be worried about, instead of fixating on one in particular, right? Well, no. VisualPolitik community, the truth is that Russia does have a lot to worry about. In recent years, South Korea's military industry has made a giant leap in quality and quantity to become one of the leading suppliers in the world. Let's just say that South Korea is becoming a key production epicenter for Western arsenals. For instance, while this country was exporting about $2 to $3 billion in arms, ammunition, and military equipment up until 2020, since then things have skyrocketed. In 2022, military exports exceeded $17 billion, and now in 2024, they're expected to break the $20 billion barrier. And so, by 2027, South Korea wants to consolidate its position as the fourth largest military supplier on the planet. Take note of this because we're talking about an astronomical change. In fact, several members of the visual team recently traveled to Daejeon to participate in KDEX, the Korean Army International Defense Exhibition. It's one of the largest military fairs in Asia and the world. Something like a huge retail space to show and place all kinds of equipment, from rifles to tanks to drones. In other words, a huge dealership for tanks, helicopters, and artillery systems. We went there to see firsthand what South Korea is doing and what its major military companies are currently working on. We'll soon tell you about all these changes on VisualPolitik, but I can tell you one thing before then. South Korea is going to be a key player in the global military sector for years to come. With its K2 tanks, its K9 mobile artillery systems, its new drones, its electronic warfare systems, its Kia branded infantry vehicles, and its popular K239 Chunmoo, its own local HIMARS, South Korea is going to make a big splash. For the time being, Poland has already placed orders with the South Korean defense industry worth more than $20 billion. And it's not the only one. Countries such as Finland, the United Arab Emirates, Australia, Indonesia, the Baltic Republics, and Saudi Arabia have already become regular customers. South Korea offers advanced, economical, efficient equipment without any restrictions on its use. There's no need to receive Seoul's permission to use them, as is the case with Washington and US military equipment. And it's not just a matter of cost, efficiency, and freedom of use. It's that South Korea also manages to produce faster than other countries. It appears it's increasing its gross production capacity very fast, which naturally shortens delivery times for purchased equipment. Features that would be very valuable for Kyiv's resilience. But what if I told you that fear of Russian reaction is not the only reason why offensive weaponry has not been sent to Ukraine? Because yes, so far, Seoul has sent Kyiv gas masks, bulletproof vests, medical supplies, Sanyong Musu vans, bulldozers, K-600 combat engineering vehicles for mine clearance, and equipment along those lines. Basically, as you can see, all non-lethal equipment. And this is so due to the fear of Russian reaction, and basically because today, the South Korean Foreign Trade Act still prohibits the export of weapons if they're not for quote-unquote peaceful purposes. And how on earth can a weapon have a peaceful purpose? Well, translated from Korean, this means that the country cannot export weapons to countries that are currently at war or have active conflicts. This obviously affects Ukraine. Of course, this is not to say that South Korea has not played any role in the war. Seoul is selling a lot of equipment and ammunition to many countries allied with Ukraine, which has a direct benefit for Kyiv. Thanks to orders from South Korean industry, these allied countries can provide Ukraine with more aid. This is exactly what has happened with the ammunition issue. I'll give you some of my ammunition and replenish it with purchases from South Korea, who has the ability to ship it to me relatively quickly. That's it. Laws are not untouchable. They can be changed. And in this case, a legislative change in South Korea could help to turn the war around in a big way. Something that is not science fiction. It could happen if Moscow continues to strengthen ties with Pyongyang, or if Washington finally pushes for Seoul to make the move. And that's precisely why we on VisualPolitik have asked ourselves the following question. What would happen if South Korea ultimately did decide to send lethal weaponry to Ukraine? What could they be equipped with? Could those weapons change the course of the war? How would it affect the South Koreans? And what could Russia do to punish them? Well, today on VisualPolitik, we will answer these questions and more. But first, traveling to a distant country like South Korea can be a headache if you aren't well prepared. The time difference, the language barrier, a different currency. There's no doubt that with our phones today, many of these problems have been reduced. However, a smartphone without internet can be as useful as a paperweight. Well, thanks to Olafly, on your next trip, you won't need to spend a fortune on international roaming services to stay connected. With Olafly, you can take full advantage of technology with its digital card, the eSIM. Forget about physical SIMs opening up your phone and running the risk of losing your original card. With this virtual card, you will be able to purchase your mobile data plan immediately in more than 200 countries without interruptions, including more than 150 countries with unlimited data, without depending on Wi-Fi or expensive tariffs. You can enter their app or website and select the plan that best suits your needs. After that, you'll only have to install Olafly's international eSIM with a QR code, or through their app, and that's it. You can instantly discover the best places in the world, connect with your accommodation upon arrival, and share your best moments with your family and friends through the network. With Olafly and its eSIMs for unlimited data travel, you don't have to worry about your connection. We'll leave you a link in the description through which you can get a 5% discount on any plan and destination on your next purchase. And I'm telling you, I use it all the time. All right, let's move on.
Munitions warfare.
It's no surprise, we've said it many times, Ukraine is short of weapons, and particularly of ammunition, something that means Russia has up to 5 times more firepower. And the problem is that we're facing an old-fashioned war, a war that mainly uses artillery to attack and defend positions. On the front, Russia and Ukraine are engaged in heavy fighting, in which artillery is estimated to cause about 80% of the casualties. In other words, talking about the Ukrainian war without paying special attention to artillery and ammunition would be like playing tennis by hitting rackets in the air, without giving a damn where the ball is. And so, both to maintain its positions and even to try to launch new counteroffensives, Ukraine urgently needs ammunition. To maintain the lines alone, it is estimated that the Ukrainians need at least 75,000 shells each month. And if they wanted to try to launch a fresh offensive, there are already rumors of another big attempt in 2025. Then they would need to consume some 200,000 shells per month to really have any chance of success. The problem is that the Western military industry is at the limit of its production, at the same time that Western stocks have been considerably reduced. Take a look at this news item.
Russia producing 3 times more artillery shells than US and Europe for Ukraine.
And where could the solution be? Well, right here in South Korea. The The South Koreans currently produce about 200,000 155mm artillery shells annually, which is, to give a comparison, twice as many as France. And this is a capacity that is increasing reasonably fast. However, it's not what the Koreans are capable of producing, but what they already have in storage, which is what really makes the Americans and Ukrainians green with envy. As of today, it's estimated that Seoul has about 1 million NATO standard 155mm shells in storage. This is the ammunition used in crucial weapons for Ukraine, such as the American M777 howitzers, the French Caesar, or the German Panzerhaubitze 2000. But that's not all. Although this is the key ammunition for carrying out deeper and more lethal attacks, most of the ammunition being consumed in the war is of another caliber, 105mm. Ukraine has about 100 howitzer launchers of this caliber. Well, what if I told you that the South Koreans keep more than 3.4 million 105mm artillery shells in their arsenal? Come on, I'll double the bet. What if I also told you that the South Koreans are planning to retire their K-105 artillery systems of the same caliber and send them to the reserve? We aren't talking about a small matter. We're talking about more than 200 systems that the South Korean army is going to replace with the more powerful K9 Thunder self-propelled howitzers that use a different caliber ammunition. Now do you see where this is all going? This change in the South Korean military would mean that they would have a large quantity of launchers left over, and a large portion of those 3.4 million 105mm caliber shells that Ukraine needs so badly. Not surprisingly, the Americans' mouths are watering. By itself, Seoul could guarantee all the ammunition Ukraine needs to sustain its war effort and carry out new offensives for 1 to 2 years. So Washington is trying to convince Seoul to give their K-105s to them, or at least some of the ammunition they will have left over. In return, Uncle Sam would provide Seoul with ammunition for its most modern weapons, and would also place many orders for its budding industry. Then, of course, would come the second part of this story. The United States would kindly hand over all these munitions to Ukraine. The question is, in Moscow's eyes, would this be a delivery of lethal weaponry from South Korea to Ukraine? Technically, it wouldn't be, but who knows how Russia might take this sort of move. What's clear is that this scenario makes Russian generals very nervous. With indirect support from South Korea, Ukraine could match Russia in firepower for a long time. In other words, this would be a watershed move in the war. Surprised? Well, there's still a lot more. Many of you may be wondering how on earth South Korea has managed to stockpile almost 3.5 million 105 caliber shells, and why on earth are they in storage gathering dust? Well, obviously the answer can be found in a flash, just by looking at their neighbors to the north. In the event of war, artillery would also be a major player on the Korean peninsula due to the type of weaponry that Pyongyang has, and because of that, Seoul has been stockpiling a huge amount of ammunition in its arsenals. And there's even more. In 2000, the United States sold and transferred to the South Korean government a huge inventory of conventional weaponry it had deployed in South Korea. But okay, although it would be very, very important for its military capability, Ukraine doesn't only need artillery. Ukraine needs weapons of many other types, both to defend itself and to attack. In fact, just over a year ago, in May 2023, Olena Zelenska, the First Lady of Ukraine, already looked to South Korea to order a very specific type of weapon. Take a look.
Ukraine's First Lady asked South Korea for air defense systems and non-lethal military hardware.
As you know, Russia fires at everything it can in Ukraine, and it doesn't matter what the target is. Military infrastructure, civilian infrastructure, apartment buildings, schools, or hospitals. It makes absolutely no difference. Moscow has set no limits. That is why one of the major efforts of the Allies in recent months has been to provide Ukraine with a lot of batteries and anti-aircraft systems. But despite this, Kyiv still operates only 3 Patriot systems to cope with all the missiles and airstrikes carried out by Russia. And according to Zelensky, it would take at least 25 Patriot batteries, or an equivalent system to provide adequate protection. Well, this is exactly where South Korea could also be crucial. We're talking about the South Korean KM-SAM system, which is known in the military world as the Korean Patriot. And it's not even the best they could offer Ukraine to protect its skies, because the South Koreans have developed an even better one, the LSAM, a system that will have 2 versions, one anti-aircraft type, and the other focused on ballistic missile interception. Now, why do I say will? Well, because production of the system won't start until 2025. But if the conflict drags on, It could also be key in protecting Ukrainian skies, among other reasons because the South Korean systems are much cheaper to operate than the American ones. Along these lines, the South Korean LSAM can intercept ballistic missiles at up to 100 kilometers, while the maximum on the Patriot is between 40 and 60. This means that incoming missiles could be intercepted sooner, and that in the event of a misfire, there would be room for more attempts before the missiles reached their targets. But wait a minute, because the role South Korea could play in Ukraine may go far, far, far beyond artillery munitions and anti-aircraft batteries. On top of that, what if I told you that they could, on their own, supply practically everything Kyiv needs to defend itself against Russia? Yes, you heard me correctly, and no, I'm not exaggerating. South Korean K2 tanks are considered one of the best in the world. In fact, Poland has purchased almost 1,200 tanks under 2 different contracts. If a crew of these tanks were to join the American Abrams and German Leopards that Ukraine has already received, the balance of firepower on the ground could change radically. And not only that, its K239 Chunmoo rocket system that we've told you quite a bit about here on VisualPolitik could prove to be key to complementing HIMARS. What's more, some military analysts consider the Chunmoo to be better than the HIMARS because it can launch more rockets in a single reload, and also because it can combine 2 different types of projectiles. You can even reload a Chunmoo with rockets and a missile with 300 kilometers range simultaneously. This would allow Ukraine to clear entire areas of anti-aircraft defenses before launching a much more powerful missile to strike strategic targets, such as weapons depots or military airfields. However, as they say, everything in life has a price. And although all this sounds very nice and hopeful, don't forget Putin's threats that we were telling you about at the beginning of this video. The question is, would it be worth for South Korea to get into this mess? Well, let's find out.
Linked conflicts?
In chaos theory, there's a metaphor that I'm sure many or all of you are familiar with. The butterfly effect. Yes, I'm referring to that theory that says that the simple flapping of a butterfly's wings has the consequences on the other side of the world. Well, the complicated geopolitical balance works a bit like this. If South Korea were to directly or indirectly send weapons to Ukraine, the repercussions would not only be felt in Ukraine, the most direct. Next, of course, we'd automatically have the rupture of relations between Seoul and Moscow. And no, it's not as if the relationships today are particularly great. South Korea has backed much of the sanctions imposed by the West against Russia, while most of its major companies have either cut off business with Russia or reduced it to a minimum. And also, as we said, they've helped Ukraine with non-lethal defensive materials. But of course, it's one thing to do that, and quite another to deliver bombs, missile launchers, howitzers, and all kinds of equipment that could cause Moscow a lot of pain. So the question is, how could Moscow threaten Seoul? Perhaps through oil? Well, maybe a few years ago this would have worked, but today it's certainly no longer a possibility.
Even without sanctions, South Korea significantly reduced fossil fuel imports from Russia.
South Korea has not formally joined the international sanctions on Russian hydrocarbons, but that doesn't mean they haven't done anything. Take a look at this chart. As soon as Putin invaded Ukraine, the South Koreans stopped imports from Russia in their tracks. In fact, it's estimated that this year, 2024, it's already managed to eliminate all imports of both crude oil and Russian naphtha into the country. The substitutes? From the Middle East. So no, Putin can't go down that path to punish South Korea because in Seoul they were already prepared long ago. In general, it seems that Russia has only one trump card, that of delivering advanced military weapons and technologies to North Korea. Now, what exactly could this consist of? Well, for instance, Russia could provide Kim Jong-un's regime with Sukhoi Su-35 fighter jets, one of Russia's most modern fighters, which are considered to be a match for South Korean KF-16s, for example. That in itself would be a very significant change, because the North Korean Air Force is virtually non-existent today. To give you an idea, they operate aircraft that are between 40 and 60 years old. These are pieces that in any other country would be put in a museum for school children to take pictures with, but that Pyongyang continues to use as its aerial vanguard. We're talking about aircraft such as the Sukhoi Su-7 or the Chinese Shenyang J-5, which are the Chinese version of the Soviet MiG-17. Chinese, but from Mao-era China. The most modern thing they have is a handful of MiG-29s from the 1980s, but that's as far as it goes. And not surprisingly, as you can imagine, the decrepit state of the so-called Korean People's Army Air Force is quite a strategic asset for the South Koreans. In the event of a war, Or it would take minutes, or perhaps a few hours if we're very pessimistic, for them to take total control of the skies. The North Korean Air Force would have absolutely nothing to compete against the KF-16s or F-35s that Seoul has. So of course, if Russia wanted to change this advantage by providing Pyongyang with its modern fighters, it would be a huge problem. Another thing Russia could do would be to give North Korea access to its spy satellites. Although the North Koreans already have spy satellites in orbit, they are nothing compared to Russia's satellite network. This could also be crucial in the event of a conflict. And then, of course, what we mentioned at the beginning, precision weapons or advanced missiles. The range of possibilities is immense. And let's not kid ourselves, South Korea has no interest in anyone militarily reinforcing its northern neighbor. Because remember that Seoul doesn't have nuclear weapons, and as long as it does not, its only deterrent is to maintain its conventional military superiority at all costs. That's the bottom line. So you see, like the butterfly effect, South Korean aid to Ukraine could trigger a huge earthquake on their own territory. If Putin were to lose it and commit the imprudence of militarily reinforcing Pyongyang, this could trigger one of the largest military escalations, not only in Asia, but in the entire world. And this is a scenario that Seoul doesn't even want to hear about. That's why, to this day, they haven't delivered lethal weapons to Ukraine, and that's why, for the time being, they're unlikely to do so. And to do so in a roundabout way, well, it would have to be seen if they dare to play with Putin's red lines. Red lines that, as a side note, the United States, European countries, and Ukraine itself have crossed several times since the beginning of the war without any serious repercussions. In any case, the important thing is that, as you can see, South Korea could be an important asset in this war, and in the end, I guess it will all depend on where Washington stands. But at this point, the questions are all over to you. With what we have just told you, do you think Seoul will eventually send weapons to Ukraine? Would that bring us closer to a fresh battle on the Korean Peninsula? Leave us your thoughts below in the comments, and let's start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, like it, and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so you won't miss any news. Also, don't forget to check out Olafly if you're traveling abroad. And as always, thank you so very much for watching. All the best. We'll see you next time.